Hello from Al Jazeera. This is Washington, D.C. This is America. We're coming to you from our bureau right near Capitol Hill. And here right now on the Hill, Republican lawmakers are worried. They are concerned because many are up for re-election later this year. As the world listens to the words of President Trump, many of their constituents are telling them they are worried. Those levels of anxiety are through the roof, just like oil prices. And we're going to look at that in more detail shortly. But first, Anna Burns-Francis.
Thanks, Phil. That's right. It is all about affordability and anxiety. The war in Iran is hitting home in America. Rising gas prices fueling a crisis not just in the back pocket, but across the political spectrum. We're joined by a team of correspondents across the Capitol to discuss this big issue facing Americans as midterm elections loom. Kimberly Halkett joins us from the White House, and our chief US correspondent, Alan Fisher, joins us from Capitol Hill. The price of Brent crude oil is over $100 a barrel today, and that is bad news when it comes to filling up the tank. A month ago, regular gasoline cost $2.92 a gallon. That's 77 cents a litre. But since the start of the war, it has gone up and up and up. Now at $3.71 a gallon, or 98 cents a litre. Much like the cost of groceries and the level of unemployment, prices at the pump are one of those things forefront at the mind of voters, especially when midterm elections are now just 8 months away.
I feel like it's totally unfair.
It seems like a lot. It's very sad every time I have to pay for that.
It's not fair, you know what I'm saying? But nothing's fair at the end of the day.
I feel sorry for my fellow citizens who are living paycheck to paycheck.
That very real anxiety being felt by everyday Americans is rippling across the country and now all the way up to the corridors of power. Politicians are scrambling to find a way to explain away the high prices, but will it find sway with their constituents, anxious not just about the war, but about its cost to their lives and livelihoods? Let's go to Kimberly Halkett, who joins us from the White House. Kimberly, the president warned the price of oil would rise. Is he sticking to that message?
Yes, on Monday, the U.S. president continuing to stick to his message that oil prices, as they climb and the political pressure grows, that this is merely something that Americans will have to deal with temporarily. He has also said and really promised that there will be light at the end of the tunnel, saying that once the war with Iran ends, in his words, prices will drop like a rock. And he also says that oil prices will go down just like inflation. But he says when asked how long it will take and how long the Iran war will go on for, he said, we don't believe it will be long, but justifies this, saying you can't let a most vicious country like Iran have a nuclear weapon. The Middle East would be gone and Israel would go first. So the U.S. president, once again, sticking to his message that this is something that will only be a short-term pain, even as he is aware that this will put political pressure on members of his own Republican Party.
All right, Alan, I'll bring you in here because Republican politicians find themselves in a bit of a bind here defending that message from President Trump. But are some members of Congress finding themselves moving away from that leadership line?
Well, look, if you speak to someone here on Capitol Hill, all the Republicans, they'll tell you that it's March. The midterms are a long way away, and by the time we get there, then oil prices won't be a big deal. And Donald Trump has described the hike in prices as a short-term excursion. But the Republicans are worried, and one of the reasons they're worried is that they're going to concentrate in the midterms on the passing of the so-called Big Beautiful Bill. Remember that? That was all about lowering costs for average Americans. And there's a couple of independent reports that have come out very recently that say that if the oil prices stay high, all the benefits of the Big Beautiful Bill will effectively be wiped out. Here's another thing that the Republicans should be worried about. If you look at the previous midterm elections, any time the oil price has been over $100 a barrel, the party that controls the White House tends to lose, on average, about 24 seats. Now, there are some exceptions, but an average of 24 seats would mean that the one-seat advantage the Republicans have got at the moment have gone, and that will change entirely Donald Trump's last 2 years in office. One Republican said, look, it's much more important that we deal with Iran at the moment than it is to deal with the oil prices. But try taking that message into the midterm elections and selling it to people who find that their money doesn't go quite as far and their costs are much higher than they used to be.
Indeed. Alan Fisher joining us from Capitol Hill. Kimberly Halkett at the White House. Thank you both. While President Trump is at risk of losing the support of Republican lawmakers, the rising cost of energy and the flow-on effects right across the economy stand to have a major impact on even his most loyal voters. Paddy Culhane takes a look at what it means.
Iran closed the Strait of Hormuz. Shipping all but stopped. And the price at the gas pump started climbing.
It's crazy. It's, it's not needed, especially at a time when people are already struggling.
Gas is the most visible impact because the price of it splashed on brightly lit signs on many American streets. But it will not be the only one. It will soon be planting season for America's farmers, and the countries in the Middle East supply a vast amount of the fertilizers that they will need. A third of the world's urea, used to make nitrogen fertilizer, and 1/4 of another type of fertilizer using ammonia come from the region. All products that could be trapped behind the Iran-made line, meaning more expensive fertilizer or none at all, which will reduce crop yields and eventually hit food prices. For U.S. President Donald Trump, the price of gas has long been something he wanted to brag about, to send the message he is bringing costs down for Americans.
Gasoline prices are way down, and in some places, $1.99 a gallon.
Poll after poll of American voters shows their top concern is the state of the economy. So what exactly is that concern? Let's break it down according to a recent Pew poll. Top of mind, the cost of health care. After that, the cost of food and goods. They're also quite concerned about the cost of housing, the cost of electricity, the cost of gas. And this was before the Iran war started. What they seem less concerned about is how the stock market is doing. Many of those things will cost more because of the war. Senator, how do you think the war is going to impact the... We tried to ask Republican senators about that.
We'll follow up with you, okay?
Senator, can I ask you just one question? But it is something Democratic politicians are keen to highlight.
We need a president who will honor his promises to avoid foreign wars of choice and strengthen the economy here at home. And we need a Congress who will not stand silent as these promises are broken.
Many of those politicians now wondering if their support or their silence will cost them come election time. Paddy Culhane, Al Jazeera, Washington.
Well, let's take a look at how this is playing out in the US media with Phil Lavelle, where it's dominating the news cycle and the minds of Republicans. Right, Phil?
Yeah, absolutely. Panic and pivoting are two key words here for Republican lawmakers. Obviously, the Republicans, also known as the GOP, many of those lawmakers are up for re-election in the midterms in November. So there is some anxiety, and it is being reported by the Washington Post. Look, Iran's war oil shock fuels GOP political anxiety. That is the key word here. It goes on to say that this has injected new uncertainty into GOP plans to tout their progress on the economy. And it also cites a consultant working with a Republican candidate who says that they recently had to rewrite a fundraising pitch that touted gas prices from before the war broke out in late February. Right, let's move over to Time magazine. This is the headline in Time. Here's how badly oil prices could hurt Republicans in the midterms. And it has some words that are going to strike fear into the hearts of many Republicans. Look, if Republicans can't get their arms around the spiraling costs of oil, they will need to get familiar with a new greeting. Hello, Speaker Hakeem Jeffries. Remember, he is the House Minority Leader at the moment, but if the Republicans do badly, the Democrats do well, he takes the top job there. It says Republicans can see the peril as clear as day. And it moves on to talk about the previous president, Joe Biden. Look, Biden's re-election campaign struggled for several reasons, but among the biggest was his inability to convince Americans that the pain they were feeling in their wallets was not real. Of course, this was a big issue in the 2024 presidential election. Joe Biden saying the economy's doing well, you just don't really feel it at the moment. Donald Trump really went big on that in his campaign. Right, next up, we're going to go to radio, NPR, National Public Radio. This is their show Morning Edition, which is broadcast nationally, and it asks, how is Trump's war stance resonating with Republicans? And it had this take on voters. It said they are willing to tolerate it being Iran, for a very short period of time, but not if they have to pay consequences themselves in the form of higher gas prices or food prices. And it had this take on President Trump.
I'm not sure he's listening to the American people as much as he's listening to the people around him and that are close to him and other billionaires who care. And so if it's a pain point for the average American, I'm not sure that matters to him.
Right, let's head next to Politico. There's the headline there. Republicans hold their breath as energy prices swing. And it has a quote, sounds kind of obvious from the Senate Majority Leader John Thune, but it's true. The price of gas is always kind of a benchmark. Many Americans will be voting with their pocketbooks. And it goes on to say the extreme swings in global and domestic energy costs are pitting two of the GOP's biggest priorities, affordability and national security, against each other, forcing Republicans to walk a tightrope on both issues as the party works to solidify its agenda ahead of the midterms. CNBC, meanwhile, goes on to talk to some of those lawmakers, and it has this headline: gas prices threaten Republican lawmakers' plans to win on affordability. It has this take on the situation facing the Republican Party.
If indeed this war is done within the next couple of weeks, it's likely the narrative of the midterms is going to be based on affordability, the economy, or whatever big news story comes up in, say, August, September, and October. And if it's still something where we are doing strikes or asking Congress for funding, then you might see a number of Americans who are wondering why we're over in Iran.
Now, the midterms are not till November. It's March. It feels a long way away. It really isn't. The political posturing has begun. The political messaging has begun. That anxiety over affordability really being felt right now.
So what are the chances of Republicans losing the midterms thanks to sky-high oil prices? Let's ask today's guests, Republican strategist Don Ferry and political analyst Eric Ham. Thank you both for joining us. John, I'll start with you. The message of making Americans' lives more affordable, that was a key platform of President Trump. Has that idea vanished?
Well, we're going to find out. We have a long way to the midterms, so we got some time. The question is, how long will this war last, and how long will it impact not only the price of oil, but also price of just everything, because oil impacts everything. So for the president, you know, I know he's got a timeline that he's thinking about. He says 4 or 5 weeks. But really, they need to get not only on affordability, but also the president needs to focus on the economy and getting people feeling good about the economy. It's not just about affordability. It's also about getting rid of the anxiety about the future.
You said we're going to find out. That's not exactly a vote of confidence that things are going the right way.
Well, you know, we were already worried about the midterms because history would tell you the midterms are going to be difficult for whatever the party is out of power.
Yeah.
This only adds more uncertainty and anxiety with people who are running for re-election.
Eric, I'll bring you in here because there is this concept that correlation is not causation necessarily. Oil prices don't necessarily mean that seats get lost at midterms. But will this be the one issue that is the nail in the coffin for Republicans if they were already worried about their chances?
Yeah, as John said, this is already going to be an uphill climb. We know historically the party in power typically loses seats, and what we were seeing even before the war began, people were extremely anxious about rising prices, inflation, and now that we have a war that has seen gas prices skyrocket, I think what this is doing now is making it even that much more difficult. Already, there's been a record number of Republicans who are heading for the exits as we get to the midterms, and so I think what we're seeing right now is the first quarter is already gone. Now we see that the Republican Party has to figure out a way not only to solve this crisis, but also try to find a way to bring voters back to their side. That's going to be a very heavy lift when you're looking at historically bad numbers for the president himself.
Okay, finding that way. John, you're a strategist for the Republicans. What's the strategy here? Do they stay loyal to President Trump and his line, or do they branch out if they know that in their home state, in their district, that things are going to be really hard to afford, that they'd move away from that line?
You know, one of the things about this war is it has united the Republican Party in one sense. The neoconservatives really like what the president is doing. The MAGA Republicans still like President Trump. So the base is unified more than it has in the past. The other thing they have to do from a strategist perspective, there are about 30 to 35 races that really is going to depend on. For the Republicans, they need to go after the Democrats. They need to talk about the Democrats being loony left. They need to go at the Democrats are having their own kind of internal fights between the liberal wing and the moderate wing, and the liberals are winning more than they're losing. And so the Republicans have more campaign money, so they need to make as many of these races as possible, not about President Trump, but by the Democrats who are running.
Eric, I saw you nodding your head there, and I was going to ask you what advice you would have for the Republicans, but maybe actually it's the Democrats that should be capitalizing and taking some advice here.
Well, as John said, Democrats are in disarray, but you wouldn't know that from how bad things are politically for the president. And so I think if you look at just all of the special elections that have been taking place since last November, Democrats have been winning, and not only winning, but winning big in Republican districts that President Trump won by 24 points just in 2024. And we're seeing a massive swing already taking place. So, yes, that might be a strategy for Republicans to go after Democrats. But I think what Democrats need to do right now is focus on affordability and also keep their heads down and let the Republicans take all of the incoming fire in terms of the rising prices and inflation that we're seeing right now.
Yeah, which they certainly are at the moment. President Trump has again talked about oil prices today. His message of reassurance that American oil is in plentiful supply.
It's great. We're number one in oil by double now. We drill, baby, drill. We're double any other nation, and it's going to be soon triple any other nation. And that doesn't include Venezuela, who's been great. We've taken out millions of barrels of oil. It's a tremendous oil source. And
all right, then, Eric, how high will the price of oil go?
Well, the Iranians are hoping that it reaches $200 per barrel and basically collapses the U.S. economy and forces Donald Trump to actually leave. And while President Trump talks about how much oil the United States has, it really doesn't matter because, as we all know, oil is a global commodity. Yeah. And as the prices rise, it doesn't matter how much you have. Those prices are still going to go up, which is going to cause tremendous pain for consumers, they will certainly take it out on lawmakers at the polls in November.
200 seems slightly unrealistic, perhaps, John.
I don't think it's going to be 200. Listen, I think that there's a lot of wildcatters in Texas and the Permian Basin who are very happy because if you get prices per barrel below 70, it's actually hard for them to make money. They're going to make money at 100. And so there's always winners and losers. Somebody will be happy. You know, I do think that the president's doing everything he can to get as much oil on the marketplace as possible. And he's right.
Hang on, isn't everything he can not starting a war or at least
that would
have
been preferable. Yeah. But I think he saw bigger strategic reasons to go after Iran. Sure. And he's not the first president to deal with this Iranian problem. Well, he is the first president to deal with it in such a way, such an overwhelming way. And, we were talking about this in the green room, when you go to a war with a big country like Iran, it's never going to play out exactly as you want. So let's hope for the president or for the country it plays out better than we all are worried about now.
Yeah, because he is promising a big drop in the price of gasoline when the war ends. But it's not much reassurance if we don't know when that is.
If you get the Strait of Hormuz opened up again, and it seems like he's putting as many resources into that as possible, prices will go back down again.
Okay. As we say, prices could go back down again. It is a long way, Eric, until the midterms. How much of this issue right now in this time and place will be of an impact to voters as they turn up to the ballot box come early November?
Look, if we look at when Donald Trump first came into office in 2025, voters had already seen a very unpredictable and chaotic president with the Liberation Day tariffs, everything that we've seen from ICE. And so I think already you have begun to see voters, at least they wanted to see less chaos from the president. And I think now that we see this war where the United States is isolated, only the United States and Israel, we're seeing American allies who are refusing to join and help in this operation. And so I think now Americans recognize that there needs to be more of a check on this president. And I think that's why not only are you seeing some of the MAGA base, young voters, people of color who sided with the president in 2024, moving away from Donald Trump, I think that number is only going to grow. And I think that could be problematic because, again, voters don't want to see all of the chaos that's playing out right now.
Okay, in terms of the chaos playing out, part of that is the messaging from the Republicans on the Hill. Do you see Republicans finding some common message between now and November?
Well, they better. The president did promise to be a disruptor in chief, and he's really disrupted a lot of things. The question is, can he turn his focus back to the everyday concerns of his voting base? And to your point, a lot of people are very frustrated with this war because they don't like a lot of Republican young men especially don't like Israel that much. And so you need to make the point that this is actually going to change things and make things better. And this is a small sacrifice to pay for wider peace and security in America. That's a mighty big thing to make, mighty big point to make between now in November. And to your point about a check on the president, that's always the thing that seems to happen in midterm elections. So the president's got to make the case that it's not about a check on the president. We need to stop the obstruction of the Democrats. If he doesn't make that point, then they're going to lose the midterms.
All right. John Ferry, Eric Ham, thank you both for coming in. Those fractures showing up in the Republican Party have been playing out very publicly on social media. Here's Alex Baird with this week's Roundup.
Well, that pain at the pump is splitting the Republican camp online. Conservative commentator Matt Walsh up in arms at this off-the-cuff remark by Trump, saying you aren't helping anything, least of all our chances in the midterms, by pretending that this is good messaging. And that's the thorn in the side for Republicans right now, those midterm elections. Republican Congressman Thomas Massie of Kentucky is one of those facing re-election. And the threat at the ballot box has him taking aim at oil prices, saying the war with Iran isn't America first. But Trump, unsurprisingly, is sticking to his guns, saying soaring oil prices are just short-term and that, in all caps, only fools would think differently. The White House at pains to remind voters that things were worse under Biden in 2022, when oil prices went as high as $139 a barrel. This take from Vice President J.D. Vance going viral online.
In the Biden administration, they were crazy high. The gas prices we're seeing today are nothing like what we saw at the peak of the Biden administration because the president...
Energy Secretary Chris Wright has also been sticking to that same line, that prices today are still lower. But no matter the state on the gas station forecourt, Americans are feeling it. And for Republicans facing midterm elections, that pain at the pump could make all the difference.
Well, that's all for now from Washington, D.C. On This Is America, we'll keep following the decisions that shape the U.S. and influence the world. And now we'll head back to Al Jazeera's global headquarters in Doha. Thanks for watching.